All right, once again, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, or good evening, depending what part of the world you are joining us from, or when you happen to be watching this. We're very happy to have you with us here today. This is Family Mental Health, Enabling versus Empowering. This is a webinar presented by the CAFÉ TA Center, facilitated by our friends Kirsten Drybrough and Charlotte Armstrong, to whom I will introduce you in just a few minutes. As usual, before we get into the content of the webinar, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do, just to give you some context. The CAFÉ TA Center is part of an organization located here in Tallahassee, Florida, called the Family CAFÉ. We're a grassroots cross-disability nonprofit with a national scope. Some of you probably know us from our annual conference that's held in Orlando each year. And some of you probably know us through our SAMHSA grant, the CAFÉ TA Center. Tell you a little bit about that grant if you're not familiar with it. It is a SAMHSA-funded consumer and consumer supporter TA Center. SAMHSA, of course, is the federal agency tasked with working in the mental health and substance use field. The thing about the consumer and consumer supporter technical assistance centers that make them unique is that, unlike a number of clinical or academic technical assistance centers that are funded by SAMHSA, the 5 consumer and consumer supporter TA centers are operated by people with lived experience of mental health conditions or people who are in a direct family relationship with people with mental health conditions. So both as part of what we do more broadly as the Family CAFÉ and within the TA Center itself, it's all about people with lived experience using their knowledge to talk to other people having those same experiences. This is a space where we encourage mutuality. It's not experts talking to people who are non-experts. It's all of us talking to each other and sharing what we know about the lived experience of mental health and how to navigate it. And in today's case, specifically through supporting people in our families trying to reach recovery. And just as an aside, we always get this question: why is it called CAFÉ? That's actually an acronym for collaboration, advocacy, friendship, and empowerment, which are sort of our founding values. Gives us our name, gives us a little bit of direction, and also results in us getting some cold calls about restaurant equipment, but we're not going to worry about that right now. So like all good TA centers, we have a lovely website, which I encourage you to visit at cafetacenter.net. Some cool stuff you can find there, which I'll tell you about real quickly. First of all, if you go to that trainings page on there, it says TAC trainings in the menu. That has recordings of every webinar we've done throughout our entire grant. It's also where you can find links to a couple of really cool curriculums we've created. Specifically, one we'll talk about more towards the end of today's session that's about family mental health. It's a 5-part series with a workbook and pre-recorded videos. It's really cool. So do check that out. Of course, you can join our mailing list there at the website, cafetacenter.net. And perhaps most importantly, that's also where you're going to be able to find a recording of today's session. So if there's anything you want to go back and review, you want to share it with anybody in your network, there'll be 2 places the recording will be posted. One in that item on the homepage there now, it's right at the top, that's promoting this webinar. I'll change the registration link to a recording link so you have to find it there. And then I'll also be adding it to that TAC training page so you can go find it at the top of the list, which is organized chronologically. So it'll be right there at the top and easy to find that recording once we're done. Next things to tell you a little bit about myself and my co-host, John. So my name is Jeremy Countryman. I'm the Vice President of the Family CAFÉ and the Program Director of the CAFÉ TA Center. I'm both a person with my own lived mental health experience and a parent of multiple kids that have different things going on that are kind of in that cross disability space, both what you might think of as your traditional developmental disabilities and mental health issues as well. I have with me today our training coordinator, John Ferron, joining me from Hastings, Nebraska. Welcome, John. John is also a parent of transition age youth who have mental health conditions. So we're both coming to this both as professionals, but also as people who have lived it and have experiences that probably align in a lot of ways with yours. So I'm going to hand it off in a moment to Kirsten and Charlotte once I introduce them, but just to let you know, John and I will be here throughout. One of the things we try to do is keep track of everything that's going on in the chat or anything that comes in through that Q&A function that's available in Zoom. In keeping with our approach to our entire project, we want to make this a space where there can be discussion, where it's more of a two-way street than sort of just a traditional presentation model. So even though it's a webinar, we welcome you to share your questions and comments in the chat or through the Q&A, and John and I will be tracking those and making sure everything that you bring up gets brought into the conversation as we go along. So with that, it's my pleasure to welcome Kirsten and Charlotte. They're going to tell you a little bit about themselves. Before they do that, though, I just want to pitch one other extra sweetener that we have. And usually we mention this at the end, but I thought, hey, why not bring it up right at the top this time? In addition to all the information Kirsten and Charlotte are going to be sharing with us today, they're also available for individual consultation. So once we get to the end of the webinar, you'll see their email addresses up there on one of the final slides. But we do have a number of hours set aside for them to talk with people individually about anything that they have going on in their family mental health dynamics. So I certainly encourage everyone to take advantage of that if you would like to. So with that, thanks again for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And now it's my pleasure to hand it off to Kirsten and Charlotte.
Thanks, Jeremy, and welcome everyone. My name, like Jeremy said, is Charlotte Armstrong. I'm a person with lived experience of supporting my children who have mental health challenges, but also I come as a child of parents who both struggled with mental health challenges and substance use. And I spend my day job actually is training family peer supporters. And I absolutely love doing webinars like this, sharing from, my lived experience and supporting families. And you'll hear little bits about my story as we go through this webinar today. And, any story I share about my family, my daughter, she's given me permission to share. She's really proud of the work that I do and that Kirsten does. And she hopes that by hearing little glimpses of her life and my life, it supports others in finding some tools or some supports that they need to support themselves as they care for someone who may be struggling with their mental health. Kirsten, you want to introduce yourself?
You bet. Hi, everybody. I'm Kirsten. I'm your co-facilitator for the webinar tonight with Charlotte. And I too am a family peer worker, and I have the lived experience of having 2 adult children now, and one who lives today in what I like to say wellness with a significant mental health diagnoses. And, I too, my daughter's very proud of the work that I do and how my career path changed within our own family mental health story. Go back about 12 years, I didn't really know much of anything around mental health or what that looked like, or I wasn't ready for what was about to happen to my family as we were raising our daughters. And today, I too, my day job is working, supporting families who are supporting somebody in their family unit that's struggling with mental health and or substance use disorder. And I just want to touch on that word family. If you're here today and you're supporting someone or you have somebody in your circle that you consider family, that's exactly what Charlotte and I are talking about when we use that term family. So we're certainly not holding that to a traditional model. And I also just wanted to touch on the word child. We're going to use that word a lot. And, we're referring to somebody, your child can be 44 years old, 24 years old, the whole gamut. So I just wanted to clarify that as well. And I think that's about it.
Thanks, Kirsten. Jeremy, you want to advance the slide? So for anyone who's not familiar with what peer support is or family peer support, we pulled the definition from SAMHSA, and I know it talks about assisting parents, but we like to consider, like Kirsten said, if you're here supporting someone that's near and dear to you, maybe, your traditional family or a friend, coworker, whatever that looks like. And that's what we do in family peer support. We support you as you're supporting, the person that's near and dear to you. And, I remember back when we were first starting out, Kirsten, I remember in your story and my story, gosh, if I'd had a family peer worker there to support me as I was trying to navigate the system, as I was trying to figure out what was happening, would have made a huge difference. And I think that's why both of us changed our job. Like we quit what we were doing, and we're so passionate about family peer support because it made such a difference in our world. And we're hoping that it'll support you. And like Jeremy said, if you're looking to meet with us one-on-one, we've got some time and love to support you as what's going on for you. Jeremy, you want to go to the next slide? So today we're going to start to think about, what are we going to talk about? That word enabling, and advocating. And so we're going to look at how the role that we play in our family's mental health story, things that we can take a look at and perhaps change. We're going to look at those words, anxiety and avoidance, see how they show up in our world. We're going to learn about the difference between enabling and empowering, and how our actions can maybe change what's happening in our house. And then, of course, looking at that word boundaries and how we can maybe set a couple, change a few things that we're doing, learning about validation and responsibility. And then again, we're going to go back to that part that we can play in changing what's happening in our world. So one of the things Kirsten and I talk about is we're the only thing that we can only change ourselves. That's the one thing that we do have control over. And we're going to start to look at how few things that we can change really is going to start to support the mental health of our family and support, the adult child or the child that we're supporting, make some difference. Kirsten, did I miss anything on that slide?
No, I think you got it all, Charlotte.
Okay, next slide, Jeremy, please. So Kirsten, as she mentioned before, how you define mental health, or excuse me, how you define family. Again, family shows up in so many different ways in the people that we support. And again, the one thing, we like to talk about is what we call the parallel process. When one person in the family is struggling, it impacts every member of the family. And we each have a role that we play in our family's mental health story. And I remember back in the day, if you had said to me, Charlotte, what's happening for you and your mental health, I would have looked at you and said, I'm fine, I've got this. It's not about me, it's about saving my daughter. And oh boy, was I ever a bag of anxiety. I was so fearful of what was going to happen. And today, I really wasn't taking the best care of myself. And what was happening is I was living in fear-based, and a lot of the decisions I was making was based out of fear and like a reflex. And I wish if I could go back and do some of those days over again, it would have been more intentional with better care of myself and really thinking through, some of the decisions that I was going to make. Kirsten, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. And you're going to hear Charlotte and I use the word the family mental health story a lot. And that's one of the things that I can speak for Charlotte as well, that we both learned, too far into our own family mental health story, or I wish I had learned it earlier on. And the reality is we all play a part in that collective family story. And as Charlotte touched on, the parallel process, when you look at the collective family story, the collective family mental health story, and what we all bring to it, I can look back and I can tell you that I was a really, really anxious parent that was exhausted, and I wasn't taking very good care of myself at all. I was overwhelmed, and I wasn't giving my family the best version of me. So when we touch on that parallel process, going back in time, if I would have recognized that it wasn't my daughter who was struggling at the time that had to do all the heavy lifting, had to embrace all the change. And, she, was the problem with what was happening. If I would have recognized that we all had to change what we contribute and the part we play, and that would have such a powerful impact on my daughter's story, our story, you know, that would have changed things for the better earlier on. I could have given my family a more whole version of myself. So I just wanted to touch on that. This is something, words that Charlotte and I live by, that the parallel process and embracing change for everybody in the family. And that's exactly what we mean by that.
Next slide, Jeremy.
So anxiety, I just shared with you that I recognize now that, I myself had a lot of anxiety with what was happening within my family home going back in time. And, anxiety is when someone feels very intense fear, and it actually impacts how they live and what they do on a daily basis. And we talk a little bit about anxiety because we all bring anxiety to that family mental health story. Anxiety can show up, for myself going back in time, and I still struggle with anxiety from time to time. It can show up with me not being able to sleep at night, being absolutely exhausted, spending a lot of my time on the computer trying to figure out how I was going to fix, save, and solve what was happening in my daughter. Now, for my daughter in our family mental health story, anxiety showed up with, having a lot of trouble going into school, which shifted into a lot of trouble leaving the home because of really, really intense feelings that would physically come out on her. It was, the heart pounding, shaking, anyways, I just want to touch on how anxiety can show up in all of us. And it also has different impact on the family story and the different level of intensity in which it can appear. Charlotte, did you want to add anything?
I think we're going to go to the next slide, and we've got a couple of questions that we thought, is it anxiety? And so, reading it, do you often feel a sense of fear or dread, or worry that something, seems hard to control? Is this happening for you? And these are questions you can ask yourself, and you can also ask your family member if anxiety is showing up for them. Are you experiencing those symptoms that Kirsten was talking about? Are you having, trouble focusing or concentrating because your mind is filled with other thoughts or anxious thoughts? You're worrying about the future or potential of negative outcomes. And again, this is just kind of giving you a baseline to start asking, is this anxiety showing up for me? And then also the ability to ask these questions for your child or your family member, to see if that's what's happening for them. And the reason we wanted to start to talk about it is because of that word avoidance. And, we're going to share about what that looks like. But when Kirsten was talking about her daughter, first it showed up where, she was having trouble with going to school. And then it was about, leaving the house. This was definitely this anxiety that was happening for her. And then Kirsten having anxiety about how to parent this, this experience for this child of hers that, was so fearful of leaving the house. So yeah, Kirsten, you want to add anything on that?
I will. And that's the role I played early on, and for a lot of my family's mental health story was that really, really anxious, worn down parent. Boy, I wish I could go back and have a conversation with the me of yesterday or the me of those really difficult times. But I also wanted to just touch more on anxiety, and it's on such an incredible spectrum. For my daughter, anxiety, or let me just circle back a little bit. One of the things I wish I had done back then as a parent, I wish I asked my daughter more about, can you tell me what that looks like? Or can you tell me what that feels like? Early on in those early years. Ultimately, what happened in my family is my daughter's anxiety started to prevent her from going to school. And we decided to homeschool her. And we did that from grade 9 to about grade 12. Another thing that showed up for my own daughter is with anxiety, something that was a big component of her working through that. And I share this because everybody has different things that work for them and different tools. But for my daughter, it was equine therapy that played a huge role in her learning how to manage those really, really intense feelings of anxiety. Again, going back in time, I knew nothing about equine therapy or how a horse could impact how my daughter could learn to manage really intense feelings of anxiety. But there's so many things to explore, and it's on such a continuum. I just wanted to touch on that, and I wanted to touch on that. Today my daughter lives in wellness. Of course, she has feelings of anxiety from time to time, but she also has a toolbox, and she spent a lot of years really working on how she was going to support herself when the level of that intensity came up. It certainly didn't happen overnight. It happened over a collective matter of years, where she learned skills to put in her toolbox. But we all have anxiety, and I wanted to really talk about that spectrum on how and where it shows up, and the level of intensity in which it can impact your life.
Thanks, Kirsten. Jeremy, if you'd like to go to the next slide, please.
Could I just bring up a couple quick things first?
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't mind jumping into a couple. First of all, I just wanted to mention something Jacqueline brought up in the chat, which was that she is saying that one of the things that happens for her is she lives in fear of a crisis situation happening, and it makes it hard to sort of relax. Like there's that sense that you have to be hyper vigilant, and that if you let your guard down, something's going to happen. And I think the way she phrased it is she lives in fear. So I guess my question is, is anxiety, what's the relationship between anxiety and fear, the way you guys think about it? And is it something that is sort of attached to the possibility of crisis for a lot of people, or as opposed to something that's just there in the background? And how does the sort of, oh my God, there's going to be an emergency any minute kind of thinking play into people's anxiety?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one, Charlotte, and then I'll let you add. But that's such a good question. And fear, I can speak from my own experience and my family's experience. Anxiety for myself and for my daughter was deeply, deeply rooted in fear. For myself, it was the fear of, what if I wasn't vigilant? What if I wasn't paying attention? What if I missed something and something happened with my daughter that I wouldn't be able to go back from, or we wouldn't be able to go back from as a family? So that's one fold. And the second fold is, wow, I have heard this so many times from my own daughter, and that circle of the fear of the panic attack, or the fear of the anxiety, and how it just feeds into, or it did for her, it fed into, a perpetual circle of, you're having anxiety over anxiety, or you're panicking over the panic attack that hasn't happened yet. So it's a really, really difficult, loop to be caught in, and so common. And that's where Charlotte and I talk about how everybody has different tools and skills perhaps available, or they can seek out, or what will and will not work for them. But there are, my hope is there are absolute tangible ways that you can source out resources that can work for you. And Charlotte and I, for family members, being a resource for a family member who is caught in anxiety based on fear of the unknown, or fear of, will my daughter be able to move out? Will she always live with me? Or how will this play out for my family? Charlotte, did you want to add?
It's funny. I'm training a whole bunch of new peer supporters right now. And so this morning we were talking about defining what crisis, difficult moment, and emergency are. And so how did this show up in my story? Well, I was always terrified of the worst case, like whatever happened maybe 2 weeks ago or a month was going to show up again today. And so I was living in that fear. And when my daughter was really struggling, I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to be just like the time that we had to go to the hospital, or it was just like the time, she didn't want to be on this planet anymore. And so everything inside of me was like in reactive mode, fear-based. Some people call it caretaker PTSD. And it wasn't until I was able to start to take care of myself, to work on my anxiety, so that when a difficult moment was happening, say my daughter was struggling with her mental health, I wouldn't make it a 911 emergency calling, the fire trucks, paramedics, or whatever. Because there was many nights I took what was a difficult evening for her and blew it up into an emergency. And I'm not saying that if everything inside of you is saying call 911, by all means call 911. But I am saying I wish I had done a check-in on myself and really been accountable for the part that I played in making a difficult evening into a 911 emergency. And then what would happen is if we went to the hospital, the doctors would say there's nothing we can do because it was a difficult moment. And I wish they had said that to me, hey, mom, you took a difficult moment, brought her to the emergency department. Maybe if you spent some time taking care of yourself, you two could have been able to sit together and support her in a difficult moment. And we are going to talk a little bit more about this as we go through this webinar. But again, Kirsten and I talk about is what can we do to support ourselves when life is easy? So thinking back on that comment, you couldn't enjoy those moments when life was a little kinder because you were so terrified. But also having some tools to support yourself when life was harder. And so we're going to move into that word avoidance. So the next slide, please, Jeremy. And, when I think about avoidance, and I use this picture of eggshells, and, back then I was walking around on eggshells. I was so terrified that, things I would say would have an impact on her mental health, or things that I would do would have an impact on her mental health. And there's a book about, Stop Walking on Eggshells, which I've read a couple of times. But that was part of my anxiety, was I didn't want to go places, or I wanted to avoid places that would have an impact, on her mental health. And so how did that show up? If I knew that if I said something that would maybe upset her, I wouldn't. And then for the anxiety and avoidance on my daughter's part is, she was living with, similar to Kirsten's daughter, fearful of certain things, avoiding certain things. But she also, and I hate to say this, she kind of knew how to play me too. And so I was thinking of a time back when she was in university, and she had left a paper to the last minute and showed up, hysterically crying and, upset. And instead of me supporting her, around natural consequences or helping her write the paper, I stayed up all night and wrote it for her, because I didn't want the impact of what was happening for her, those natural consequences. I didn't want it to, because I was scared she was going to become suicidal again. And so, I wrote the paper, and I'm being honest. I wrote the paper, and instead of that messaging around how can I support you? Is there something that I can do to help you through this evening, or whatever that looked like? But we talked years later about it, and she said, Mom, it had nothing to do with my mental health. I was being lazy. And I knew if I cried, if I knew if I, did a couple of things, you'd help me out of that predicament. And the reason I share that is because we've had a lot of back and forth, and I was mistaking a lot of her just being a typical university student as a mental health issue. So, again, I was blaming her diagnosis on her inability to write the paper or stay organized. She used to make me, she'd cry and say, I can't make that doctor's appointment. But she loved getting her nails done, and she could easily pick up the phone and make a manicure appointment. So again, it's starting to look at how maybe if they're avoiding certain things, is it really around anxiety, or is it just that they know that we'll swoop in and save save the day or make the phone call? I wish I had gone back and said, hey, listen, I can sit with you while you make that call to the doctor, because I see that you're able to call the nail place and make an appointment, or would you like to role play with me? Instead of just instantly doing 4. Kristen, did I miss anything on that one?
No, I think you didn't, but I'm going to add, and I think everyone can relate to this, perhaps. But that umbrella of mental health that I used to put my daughter's avoidance behaviors under so easily. That example of not being able to call a doctor's office to make an appointment, but being able to call to make another appointment that she wanted to make, that Charlotte made. There's that level of avoidance that also happened in my home that I quickly jumped up and did for, because I put that under the umbrella of poor mental health, and she was unable to do certain things, or I had to fix, save, and solve for her because of what was happening with her mental health. And you're right, Charlotte, I look back and avoidance was loud and clear, and it was happening on my daughter's, with her behavior in certain circumstances, absolutely. And then also it was happening with me. I had a lot of trouble saying no. I did for often because I didn't have the energy, the strength, or felt well enough to have that conversation about saying no. And I avoided conversations, and I did for very easily. So I too was doing a lot of avoidance tactics within our family mental health story. Absolutely. Did you want to go to the next slide, Jeremy? So here's a few questions that are just something for you to think about if you're trying to really tackle that avoidance issue. Am I avoiding? Is it mental health? Is it severe anxiety? What's happening within my family story? First one, are you actively trying to stay away from certain situations or activities? 100% I did that. 100%. Do you often make excuses or find reasons not to face something you're uncomfortable with? Again, my daughter did this often. I can't tell you how many times I called a doctor's office and made an excuse that my daughter could not be at her appointment that was going to be in about 15 minutes, and made excuses for her. I did that all the time. I made excuses around not being able to attend family dinners, or I've even called her work early on and made excuses why she couldn't make a shift. The next one, is there a specific event or person you're trying to avoid? Are you avoiding tasks that you perceive as challenging or unpleasant? Again, both on my daughter's and my part as a parent, we both absolutely did this. I would avoid a lot of things because I didn't have the energy to have that conversation or to have that battle. It was a lot easier for me to avoid it or do for her. Is your avoidance behavior impacting your daily life or responsibilities? Again, 100%. That showed up in my home, a lot on my daughter's side and also on my side as well. Charlotte, does anything here speak to you?
Well, I want to say that if stuff's coming up for all of you and you're saying, oh my gosh, me too, and oh, I'm having a hard time with this. And I always like to say, we do the best that we can with the tools that we have at the time. And then when we start to learn different and do different, this is about learning what's working for you and what we need to have a little bit more support with. And so if you're feeling like, oh my goodness, I can't, or this is too much, we were there too. And it wasn't until we started to take a look at the things that we could change. And both of us started with some little things at the start, Chris. I remember turning off my phone and going to a movie for 2 hours. And I hadn't done that in years. And it may seem like, what are you talking about? But I was 24/7 alert, ready to act and jump on whatever showed up. And so it was starting to look at things that I could change to support myself, but also putting that message back to my daughter that I know you have the power within you, that if something happens in the next 2 hours, you've got this. Like those kinds of things we talk about a lot, and happy to explore it with you if you'd love to meet with us one-on-one. But the next slide, we're going to start to look at those words enabling and empowering. And our intro to anxiety and avoidance, it really starts to play in how we show up in enabling and how we show up when we start to change the messaging to that of, you know what, like I said, you've got the power within you, and I know you can do this without me for a moment, 2 hours, or my hope is for the rest of your life. And Kirsten, I know you want to talk about enabling, and I got a couple of stories to share too.
Sure. Thanks, Charlotte. Enabling, I always joke every October that my costume should be going out as an enabler disguised as an advocate, because I wore that hat in my family for years. And a lot of the actions that I was doing, I didn't realize at the time. And again, like Charlotte said, we do the best that we can with the tools we have at the time. And when we know better, we do better. But back early on in my family story, a lot of the actions that I was doing was helping keep my daughter stuck, or was preventing her from moving forward. And I want to talk about how we define enabling when it comes to the family mental health story. So we define it as enabling is when someone's actions support or encourage another person's behavior, which could prevent them from overcoming challenges or making positive changes. It allows that person to stay stuck in their current patterns. That's a big one. Looking back, I absolutely had actions that contributed to my daughter not moving forward. I spent a lot of time managing life and things for my daughter because of a diagnosis that she was giving. And in return, she never learned through those years to really manage much of anything for herself, right? She never had to. So again, going back to that word enabling, and that's a big word, and it comes with the best of intention from a place of love. But the only thing we can control when it comes to enabling is putting the focus on our actions and what we're contributing. What are we doing that is contributing to this enabling environment that is happening within our family story? So we have the power. And I had the power early on in my family story. I just didn't tap into it. And I was very busy focusing on trying to fix and do for my daughter. I hope that makes sense. Charlotte, did you want to add?
I think back and one of the, the big picture enabling and getting messaging wrong was, we bought a house where we thought that my daughter was going to live for the rest of her life with us. And so it had this awesome basement for, a young adult to live and, rent free, full fridge and all those things, which sounded great. But the messaging I was giving her was, I never believe that you're going to be able to live without me. And if I could go back and rewrite that one, because for the longest time, she did live with us. And that's what she thought life was going to be like. And I'm so glad that I changed my messaging to her, because she lives a great life, many, many miles away from me. And I'll get to that part of the story, but that was the big picture enabling. And then the smaller stuff was like, I was making sure she got up in time. I was making appointments for her. I was, turning a blind eye when she wasn't showing up with the responsibilities in the house. And I was packaging it under her mental health issues or her mental health diagnosis. But did I do that to her younger sister? No, she had to live up to the expectations because she didn't have a diagnosis. She had to do her chores, and I expected her to, get up and go to school and show up and do her appointments and go to her job. So it's those two different messaging to both children. If I look back, I packaged so much of that questionable behavior under her diagnosis when it really had nothing to do with her diagnosis. And so again, it's starting to look at, are you making excuses for certain things? Are you doing for? And so many of the items are things that they could do for themselves. And what is your overall messaging to them? Like I said, I bought a house. Nothing in that purchase that I believe in you. Kirsten?
No, again, it's about the messaging. And, Charlotte, I'm just going to ask you, Charlotte, can you touch on a little bit about the messaging when your anxiety contributed to taking a hard, difficult night to a full-out crisis because of what you contributed off to the hospital? And what was the messaging there and the messaging that the doctors gave your daughter?
Well, again, it was interesting because those nights where it was a hard night for her and I had made it into a 911 emergency, and the doctor would say, there's nothing we can do for you to my daughter, which she started to believe that she was unfixable. And again, I wish the doctor had said, you know what? It's not about you tonight. It's about your mom. And your mom needs to have a prescription to take a check on her anxiety. Because like I said, I was sending the message to her that she was unfixable. She needed to live in our house. And the doctor was giving the message to her that she's unfixable. And I wish he had said, it wasn't about you tonight. You're having a hard night. It's about your mom making it into a 911. And again, I'm going to say, if you believe it's a 911 emergency, please go to the hospital. But if you can take some space and just, are you living in fear-based? Have you had a conversation with your family member to see what's really happening for them? Or are you just blowing it into a 911 emergency? Because I know there was so many nights. She goes back, she was like, that was not me, Mom, that was you. And I'm like, yeah, I know.
Hey, and Charlotte, I'm going to ask you one more question. Would you have been open to hearing that from the doctor at that time?
Oh, I would have killed him. I would have been, are you crazy? And that's the thing, that's the fun part of going and speaking with some people with lived experience. Because if the doctor had told me it was about me, I would have been like, oh my goodness, you are so wrong. But it wasn't until I started to, hang out with some other family members and we started to talk about nights like this, that I started to realize the role that I played and that I wasn't taking the best care of myself. And that, yeah, when I look back, that night was all about my anxiety. My daughter actually got the diagnosis of overbearing mother one time at the hospital. I was not happy with that one. So we're gonna,
Thanks.
oh,
Sorry.
go ahead, John.
I thought you were finished there, Charlotte. Kirsten, I was just going to say that Rachel, I think, had asked if you could place definition of enabling into the chat. And I wasn't sure if you had, you spoke so eloquently to it. I wasn't sure if you had something in writing, but at some point, maybe just dropping it there would be great.
Yeah, and I can do that while Kirsten, if you want to start the next slide, I can put that definition in.
Let's do it. Yes, thank you. Thanks, Jeremy. All right, so these are questions to consider. Am I enabling? And this is a tool for you to look at asking yourself some questions. And Charlotte talked about how, she wished she could have checked in with her own anxiety on those hard nights that became full out 911 crises and off to the hospital, right? So I'm just going to touch on the first one. Am I resentful, exhausted, and feeling taken advantage of? You know what? I 100% felt that way. I was so busy doing for and trying to keep everybody afloat. My own wellness was in the tank. I was exhausted. I was feeling taken advantage of. Also because, you know what, I think I was starting to recognize that there was some avoidance on my daughter's part that I was very quickly managing and jumping in to fix, save, and solve. So that's something to ask yourself. Do I have a hard time saying no? 100% hated saying no. I know that saying no was going to erupt into a full out chaotic evening. And I really just wanted to get it to bed at a decent time. And I did not have the energy. So yeah, a lot of my actions were enabling in fear of saying no. I wasn't up for it. Do I make excuses for my family member? All the time. I would make excuses at school, with family, when she had a job for a short time. There was always an excuse for her behavior. There was always an excuse for her not showing up. Again, that was part of me managing her life. So she never really had to manage her own. So again, those three things on the bottom there fed into a lot of my enabling behaviors. Charlotte, did you want to take a shot at the other three?
Wait. You know what, Kirsten, I wasn't paying attention to. I saw you went up and down, and I can't remember which ones you haven't done.
Oh, I haven't done the top three.
Oh, you did the bottom
Top
three.
three.
Okay, that's
I
what
did the
was
bottom
thinking.
three, yeah.
And so again, it's asking that question, am I doing things that my family member could do? And then asking yourself, why are you doing them? And I'm not asking you to, put some shame and blame on yourself, but really start to think about what is the intention behind why you're doing those. So when I was making those appointments for my daughter, she wasn't learning how to be self-sufficient. And she started to avoid even more things, and kind of like what Kirsten's daughter was going through too. Am I doing for an effort to avoid conflict? Yep. That was another one. It was just easier to do it than have, the fight or the disagreement. And then what are you paying for? This showed up with DoorDash in my house. So my credit card got attached to DoorDash, and my daughter would be like, you know what? I don't really want your dinner tonight. It's going to have an impact on my mental health. I really need Thai food. So I'm ordering DoorDash. And so I'm telling you this she could have eaten the dinner. Everybody else in the family was eating it. And again, like, I'm paying for things that I'm not approving of to avoid the conflict. And what message am I giving her? Like, everybody else, like I said, is eating the dinner. Why can't you be part of the family? Like, all of those things. And it had an impact on my, on my income too, because or DoorDash is expensive. But you know what? We've talked about enabling, and Jeremy, I'm going to go on to start to look at that word empowering and how it shows up. And I love this next slide. It involves more than just giving the person the tools. It has to do with that messaging. Again, it's about supporting them to unlock their own potential and inner strength. So again, it's like, what can we do in our messaging? What can we do to support them, to start to really tap into what that looks like? And, remember when I told you that when we bought this house that I thought my daughter was going to live in for the rest of her life or our life. And in my family's story, there came a time when we had to say, you know what, I think it's time that you try living on your own. And I was expecting her to, move down the street, still close, didn't want her that far away. And she moved city. And she moved, a 14-hour drive away from me. And I had to start to sit in my discomfort. And it was the help of, Kirsten going, you got to help me through this, because I really wanted my messaging back to her. It's like, I truly believe you've got the power and you're going to have this great life in a city 14 hours away. And she lived there for a while, and then she moved again. And now she was on the West Coast. And life was going along great. She had met this boy, or man, I should say, and they started dating, and they had this amazing 6 months. And then I get a phone call, and I can tell you exactly where I was at the time. And she's hysterical. And he had said to her, I love you, and I can't do life with you anymore. It's too much. And I am a 3-day drive from her, and it's a Sunday night at 7 o'clock. Do you think I could get a flight to her? And I'm panicked that this life moment of a breakout, I immediately put into a 911. She's going to become suicidal again. So I reached out to Kirsten and a couple of my other friends who could support me, because I needed to get my anxiety under control. And my messaging to her was that I know you've got it within you. And so the mom and me went, okay, I can't go because I want her to know that I believe in her and that she can get through this hard moment. So what did I do? I said, your sister can come. So I was like, her sister. Bought a ticket for her, and guess what? That night she came down with COVID and she couldn't come. This was a couple of years ago. So there Sarah was on the West Coast by herself, and we started to look at what could she do to support herself. And her grandparents lived close by, and she said, you know what, Mom, I'm going to go and live with my grandparents, and just see, they said I can come stay with them. And the next thing she said to me is, you know what, Mom, I'm going to take this course, and I'm just going to really start to journal and explore, his words and what he said about my lifestyle. And she started to work on herself, and that was in September. Now, remember, all I wanted to do was swoop in and save her. My initial reaction was I needed to go and pick her up and bring her back to that house that I had bought, that she was supposed to live in for the rest of her life. But with the help of, my support network, I changed my messaging to her. So she worked on herself September, and she worked on herself through October. And all of a sudden, unbeknownst to us, her former boyfriend was paying attention to what was happening for her. He was kind of checking in with her and her friends. And by the end of October that year, they had gotten back together. And they went on the trip that they had been planning before they broke up. And they ended up getting engaged, and they're married today. And she's living a life, it's a great life as defined by her. And the reason I share this is because I had the best intention when I wanted to swoop in and save her. But when I sat in my discomfort, I relied on the tools of my support, so that my messaging back to her was that I know you've got it within you. This is just a really hard time in your life. And I know you can find the support and the resources to get through it. And like I said, they're married today and living a life defined by her. Her wellness is defined by her. It's not defined by me. And Yeah, Kirsten, do you want to add to that? Because that's my big one in how I could
You know,
have gotten it wrong for her.
I love that story, and I love the fact that I was part of that story. But I know if you had acted on your gut and didn't tap into some tools, you would have had her back in your house within 48 hours, and chances are she would not be where she is today with her husband. So it's amazing how our actions can so greatly impact the family mental health story. I love that story.
So if you want to go to the next slide, Jeremy, and and this one, we just want you to start to think about some things that you can do to switch from, some enabling actions or behaviors that you might be doing to that messaging around you've got this, that empowering message. And so, I stopped trying to fix, save, and solve her. I stopped doing for, oh, sorry, I thought I had my phone turned off.
Hey, Charlotte, that was a divine intervention, because I wanted to just mention quickly as we're at the top of the hour, we still have a lot of time with this webinar, but I think there are going to be potentially 10-15% of the audience who might need to drop off due to the
Oh,
time.
yeah.
So if we want to just quickly, Jeremy, scroll to the end and share emails or whatever, in case people want to grab that really quick, talk again about the one-on-one time, and then we can come back to this slide in case people needed to drop off.
Oh my goodness, didn't even see the time. Go right ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, you're looking at that slide right there. So, like I mentioned at the top, Kirsten and Charlotte are both available for individual consultations, so you can reach them each at those email addresses there that you see on the screen. Also, if you lose track of that or can't, copy and paste it right now or whatever, feel free to reach out to me here at the CAFÉ TA Center, and I can connect you with Kirsten and Charlotte, no problem. So yeah, thanks for
Yeah,
that reminder.
and this webinar is not over. We've
Right.
got more time, but I just know that some people
Yeah,
they
sometimes when it gets to another hour, people have to move to another thing. So I'm glad for you putting a pin in that. So let's go back to where we were.
Yeah, and I'm just going to answer Teresa's question. Absolutely, this is going to be recorded, and Jeremy, it'll be up on the CAFÉ's website shortly.
Yes.
And you're more than welcome to share it with anybody. And I apologize for going over. Like I said, it was just this hour was zoomed by. And so we're just going to start to think about how we can change our actions. And I said we stop, fixing, saving, and solving. I started to have clearer boundaries, and like I said, I started off with going to the movie theater and 2-hour block. My phone's going to be out for 2 hours. I mean, it started small for me because I still hadn't worked through my anxiety that, I truly believe I had to be 24 hours 7, like constantly ready to react to whatever. So it was that messaging, giving our children a little space to make their own choices and experience natural consequences. If I could go back and have her not do that assignment that I wrote and spent the whole night on, I wish I could have done that differently, because I wasn't doing her any favors back then. And then I could have helped support her through her reactions, for getting an incomplete. Setting firm and kind boundaries. I always add in kindness around, this isn't a punishment. This is just how, I'm going to show up for you. These are things that I will do. It's not about controlling what they do, but it's controlling, my reaction or what I'm going to do. Again, it's exploring what you're willing to do. And I always found that when I did it with kindness, it was better received. And then the validate, validate and support yourself, but also validate and support your child. I'm seeing that this night was a hard one for you. I can see that you didn't write that paper and there's going to be some stuff happen tomorrow. How can I support you? I'm not going to write it for you tonight so you get a good night's sleep. But I'm happy to make a pot of coffee and sit with you while you kind of start to write it yourself. those kind of things we can change. Kirsten, did you want to add?
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. We've been talking a little bit, Charlotte and I use the phrase sitting in your own discomfort and shifting enabling patterns to focusing more on empowering patterns. It's going to be bumpy and you're going to have to sit in your own discomfort a little bit. It's going to feel you're a little bit out of your comfort zone. So it's little steps and it's taking little actions to start creating change on your part that impacts the entire family story. I just wanted to touch on point 2. And Charlotte, would you talk a little bit about, I remember the time that you made it very clear to your daughter, your adult daughter, what you would and would not provide moving forward when you were looking at her finding a different living arrangement. Did you want to talk a little bit about that and how it's not about punishment and control?
Yeah, and it was interesting when we were exploring at first, when it came to a place that I was like, she had to start to live somewhere else because her lifestyle choices and ours weren't jiving, and so there was a lot of intention around how we were going to have this conversation with our daughter, and it was all through kindness. And hey, your lifestyle and ours is just not jiving right now. And so she came to that decision that it was time for her to move out. After we laid some stuff on the table, and then we gave her a timeline. It wasn't like we booted her out. We gave her several months to come, forward with a plan, how she was going to afford it, what it was going to look like. It wasn't like I was like, you're out. And so it was a couple of months, and then she just decided that she was going to try a fresh start in a different city where people didn't know her. And she, found some friends who had moved there and got a room in a house that they had. And so again, it was around exploring and having that conversation together. And we had it planned out so that I wasn't emotional, I wasn't angry, I wasn't all of those things. And I was ready to accept that this was a good change for her. And I wasn't going to go back on that decision too. And gosh, I'm so happy I did, because she was still living in our basement. Like I said, she wouldn't be married today.
Thank you, Charlotte. And the other one I wanted to touch on a little bit is, we talk about setting firm and kind boundaries, and this is about letting others know what will and will not work for you moving forward. And, when it comes to your role supporting somebody within your home or in your circle that's really struggling with poor mental health and or addictions, I truly believe our actions dictate our expectations on how we expect to be treated. I can't tell you how many families Charlotte and I have supported that, the parent is so exhausted and hasn't taken care of their own wellness. They've had a lot on their plate that, they haven't put up any boundaries or haven't been clear on their expectations on how they want to be treated. Therefore, we've met a lot of families that feel bullied. There's a lot of chaos in their home, a lot of yelling, a lot of power struggles. So when we talk about, letting others know what will and will not work for us, that's drawing a line in the sand, not putting up a massive brick wall, but drawing a line in the sand that lets people know your expectations and staying firm to that line. Speaking to me in that tone of voice isn't going to work, or I'm exhausted, I'm not up for this conversation right now. I'm not engaging in this until you calm down. There's lots of different variations on how that would work, but that's what we mean by number 4.
And Kirsten and Charlotte, Christina made a point about the importance of asking. And so the list here is, all about kind of, in a way, boundaries or kind of the rules of engagement, so to speak. And she added in the comment section just how important it is to ask the person what they need, what they think, because that will, again, I think, help lead to the successful creation of these boundaries and rules of engagement.
And that's such a great point. And thank you, Christina, for that. And thank you for John for highlighting it. And that's one of the things that we do on the family peer support side is, if you're wanting to work on something like that, bouncing the idea off, role playing or getting the points and asking those curious questions instead of assuming. That's one of the things that, we talk about too when we're supporting a family is, have you explored it with your family member? You're assuming this is happening for them. Have you ever asked them some curious questions, what's happening for them? And again, it's, this list is about what we can do, but it's also, have you explored what it's like for, the person you're supporting? And so when I stopped assuming, when I started to take control, and Jeremy, I'm going to get you to go to the next slide, because the only person at the end of the day we can change is ourselves and how we show up and the actions that we have. And so, like Christina said, supporting, but not assuming, asking questions about it, but also about what you can take care of and what you can support. And I remember when I started to take better care of myself, when I started to be aware of what I was bringing to my family's story, and I started to intentionally be mindful of, when I was bringing things that were not suiting this family as well as they could. So when I was bringing my anxiety, or I was bringing my rage, or I was bringing my assumptions, when I stopped doing that, my daughters and my husband started to notice too. And we talk a lot about, like I said earlier, when we start to do things different, when we learn different, we can do differently. And my daughters are really proud of me, as well as my husband, for the work I've done on myself over the years and the support that I do for families out there. And I truly believe it has to do with being introduced to family peer support and hanging out with some others who had similar experience that had me start to take a look at myself and the part that I played in my family's mental health story. Kirsten, do you want to add to that?
You know what? I'm just going to ask Jeremy to go to the next slide, because I know we want to have some questions, and we have one slide left here. Thank you. Yeah, and that's the only thing that we can control, our own actions. Again, everything that Charlotte and I do is through the lens of lived experience, and also through the lens of what would we say to the me of yesterday, to the me early on in our family story, who was just trying to keep her head above water, right? So here's a few things that we just want you to think about. So give it a try, commit to the change you want to see in yourself. And by this, we mean, I spent so much time trying to deliver and serve my daughter choices and resources and wellness and recovery. And I didn't put any focus on myself. And I wish, going back in time, that, I had no idea the power I had to impact our whole family by just really looking inward and being intentional with my actions. We talked a lot about messaging. Send the message that you believe in your family's members' ability and their potential. That is huge. Again, that's the root of empowering. I did very, very little empowering early on in our family story, and I did a whole lot of enabling. And I don't get it right every time. But I certainly have the best of intentions to move forward with empowering actions. Give your family members the space to make their own choices. And that has me sitting in my discomfort. Even today, I'm a natural fix, save, and solve. When I can see the answer, or I think I can see the answer clearly, it's hard for me to keep that inside. But I mean, what my daughter was lacking and what turned out to be really valuable in her recovery is to experience the consequences of her action. Set the boundaries that you are willing to maintain. Again, boundaries can be firm. They can be planned out well ahead of time, like Charlotte spoke about when they were planning on her daughter leaving their family home. They're firm, they're kind, they're productive. They're not, a really heavy hand and a power struggle. So, that's a big one for us as well. And validate, be patient, supportive, both to you and your family member. This will take time to validate that there's a lot going on for the person you're supporting, to validate you feel the energy in them, that this is a really hard day, not quite sure what to say, but you got a lot going on, and I'm not sure. Just the power of validation opens up so many conversations. That's something that we talk a lot about as well. And I think that's about it. Charlotte, did you want to add before we open it up?
Well, I think we're just going to open it up, and I'm sorry we went over. We always get passionate about this topic, but we're happy to answer any questions that you all have, and we'd happy to meet with you one-on-one.
Thanks, Charlotte. And, you didn't go over, we said it was 90 minutes. It's just, sometimes people leave at the top of the hour for whatever reason. That's why we're jumping in there, not because we were out of time. So you're good in that regard. So let's see in terms of questions. And again, everybody, if you have a question right now, go ahead. You can use the Q&A or you can use the chat to let us know what your question is. There was one person, Kim, who had her hand up. I just sent her a message to see if she wanted to ask a question. So I'll see if she answers that before I do anything. And then, if it's okay with you, Carrie just put her hand up. So I'm going to go ahead and let her use her mic and ask the question in real time. So here you go, Carrie. You have to unmute yourself too. So your mic's on, but you're muted. There you go.
Wonderful. Thank you guys very much for this very rich conversation that we had today. It's very appreciated. I am a Washington State peer support counselor for youth and families, and I wear many titles, but I put in the chat, NAMI's Family to Family is wonderful. I'm a train the trainer for NAMI's Family to Family as well as basics. However, so thank you for the information. And Samson Hurst in 2015 said, we're supposed to be in full integration for mental health and primary care. They put out the WHAM program, Whole Health Action Management. Have you heard of it? WHAM. Are you guys implemented it in your communities or your counties as peer support counselors? I'm in Washington, Clark County area, and there is not one MCO that will allow us to have a conversation with them about them. They have conversations with their staff about their clients, and the WHAM program is no conversation about me without me. And here in the Clark County region, we got 5 different regions that refuse to implement the WHAM program that peer support counselors are supposed to use, and we're failing the clients. Do you guys have any suggestions that I could use to help my community? And thank you.
And Carrie, this is that advocacy hat that sometimes that we have to wear, and how do we support why, this would work for families. And I can't give you the magic recipe, but I know that Kirsten and I have had a lot of opportunities to advocate at different government levels from that lived experience. And sometimes the door is shut, and sometimes they do listen to us. But one thing I talk about is, giving, like, Kirsten and I like to give families all the options, not just some of the options, and allow people to explore, option B, C, D, whatever. And I do put those ones on the table and have them explore if they want to ask for it, if they want to look into it too. Because even if it's not available in your state or your county, they can look elsewhere. I mean, there's lots of opportunities in different places that are utilizing it too. I'm looking at the chat. Is there another question?
Yeah,
Jeremy?
Hold on a second. I got to figure out.
Yeah, I haven't seen too many questions, more just kind of some comments and people building on what you both have been speaking to. And it's been just a rich conversation as the last person said as she was speaking.
Yeah, there was one thing I'm trying to scroll back to find it, and it was kind of along the lines of this. There was one person who was talking about, determining where the line is around enabling because they have a family member who is dual diagnosed with both a mental health condition and autism and has a really hard time doing things like making appointments and talking on the phone and that kind of stuff. And I know, just in my own experience from personally and talking to other families, I think it's a challenge to know what's right for your individual situation and try to figure out kind of like, what do I want to create space to let this person try to do themselves and where do I need to step in? So I'm just curious about, what your advice is for somebody who's in that position where they have a family member who isn't really able to engage on their own and doesn't want to do it. How do you sort of start chipping away at that tendency to feel like you have to do everything for the person you're caring for because they can't do anything themselves, to open up just a little bit of space to begin the process of giving them a chance to do one or two small things. If you're really at that deep end of it, where you're first starting to attack this problem and you feel like you're not caring for somebody that has a whole lot of capacity, where do you kind of find your way in?
Well, and the line between, I think, caring and enabling.
Yeah, and that's where, paying attention to, remember when I talked about earlier on, my daughter couldn't like make a doctor's appointment, but for some reason she could make a nail appointment. They still involved the same skills. She had to dial the number, pick up the phone, make an appointment. And so we started to explore what was the difference? What was the experience around being able to make the nail appointment? And I know it might sound silly, but what happened was she was like, oh, I get anxious because I'm thinking about, I got to go see the doctor now. And so it was even that starting point of making an appointment, but the nails brought her joy. So there was no stress around it. And so then we started to explore, okay, so, what could you do to support yourself so that you wouldn't get so anxious to make the doctor's call? And we did some role playing and stuff like that. So it's paying attention to what they're able to do and where some of those roadblocks are. And then how can you change and ask questions or change your actions so that maybe they'll try to do for themselves? Because our go-to is like, oh, I'll just make it. It'll take 2 seconds. I'll make that call, boom, done. As opposed to this other process is going to take like, a couple of times, more conversation. And those are the places where if you want them to learn how to do something or start to explore doing it, we have to put in the time. And so that's where you pick what you want to explore and support and do a good job with it. Like, remember, Kirsten, I started with going to a movie, and it was a lot for me back then. My daughter and I started to work on, she wanted to be able to, go to a class because she also was homeschooled for a while. So what did that look like? Well, she started to go to a fun class, which was like a great step. She enjoyed the class, but it got her around people again. And then she was ready to have a tougher class. And then it was like a math class, which was her tough ones. So again, it's exploring what they're good at and then how you can support them on some areas that a little bit harder.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add on that a little bit, Charlotte. I was so quick to say, how can I help you with that? Or what can I do for you? Language now to my response and for some time is, how can I support you while you figure out your next steps? Or is there anything I can do to support you as you make a plan. That was a big one for me. And I also wanted to touch on, there's mothering too. Charlotte and I have had this conversation a little bit with a lot of families because we talk a lot about enabling, empowering. And we can still mother at times. We can still do kind things. To define empowering and enabling and to know what path you want to take is such a big part of it, but we can also be kind and do nice things. We just got to be careful of how far over the line and if we get caught up in enabling, right? Yeah.
Susan has her hand up, so I'm gonna go ahead and invite her to ask a quick question. I think she might have been the person who made the comment I was referring to. Susan, you can talk now. You just have to turn your mute off on your end. There you go.
Thanks. My daughter actually is high functioning autism, and I strongly believe in people being independent. My older daughter is extremely independent, lives out on the opposite coast of me. But we have, been through quite a bit with major depression, anxiety, OCD, and a learning disability. And she's very bright, but has very poor executive functioning. And she has failed through school because it's very hard to know when to jump in and when not to jump in. And she can't sleep, and she will sometimes just get up like a half an hour before she has to go to bed, because part of living at home is she's always had to have at least a part-time job. So she works at the local library and is attempting to go to school. But when you have a medical appointment, because she also has medical issues, and you're concerned that your child will not get the help that they need with a medical appointment, I have come to the point where I think months will go by and an appointment's not made, and I'm still seeing her suffer. And then I don't want to argue with her. I'll say, what can I do to help you make this call? I've done that, and it still doesn't get done. So sometimes I will make that call. I mean, but I feel like I am holding her back. It's a very, very hard to know what to do. It's not like she would make a call because she enjoys something, because she would never call for a nail appointment or for takeout food or those kinds of things. She just won't use the phone.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Kirsten, and then I'll talk.
I was going to say, Susan, you have a lot on your plate. It's so not one size fits all. I believe that we as parents also know in our gut when to act on something or step in a certain direction. The whole idea of, our conversation and bringing all this awareness is, to help us as parents, as family members, to show up in the best version of us to support our loved one who is struggling. And my hope for you is that you listen to your gut and you try to give yourself grace, because I completely understand that the situation you were talking about months go by, I can completely relate and understand. And it sounds like you're still really in the trenches. So, there's no right or wrong. We're all navigating this as best we can. And I believe that you know those answers within. And if it means getting her to a doctor's appointment, and you're making the appointment for her in the best interest of her health, don't question yourself. That's all I have to say on that one. Charlotte?
And I was going to say, the same thing. And it's that place of being kind to ourselves too. And like trusting your gut. Kirsten and I we were working in family peer support training, and we were still choosing some things to support our daughters that, maybe others would say, why are you doing that? But we were doing what we felt was best at the time. And, like well into my daughter's 20s, I was doing stuff for her. When she was 25, I was doing stuff for her then. And, And one day she decided she wanted something different with life. And you never know what's going to change within them, that they want to start to do something different. And we're there to support them as well. So, please, Susan, if you need to make that appointment, by all means, keep doing what you need to do.
And I'm going to speak for both Charlotte and I. We still, with the knowledge we have and how long we've been at this and the work that we do, we don't get it right all the time. We don't get it right 100% of the time. And we have some really interesting conversations between us at times. We can identify where things are getting off track, but we do not get it right 100% of the time.
Well, I think that's honestly a good note to conclude on, because that's something that I think is key to keep in the back of your mind whenever you're trying to wrap your head around, am I enabling or am I empowering? Nobody's perfect 100% of the time, and doing the best you can is good enough. So give yourself that slack.
Yeah. Well, I want to add something too. I was going to type it, but you started the closure, so I didn't think I'd have enough time to finish typing.
Yeah, go ahead.
But I think that is a really common theme I've seen in the chat and just overall discussion, kind of this question, this line between enabling and care. And, we talk about, is it enabling or empowerment, but then also just our role as potentially caregivers. And so sometimes enabling is juxtaposed to care. And when is it true care that's needed? When is it enabling? And it just crossed my mind that, with our daughter, Chloe, I remember realizing that, if I do something for Chloe, the next time something comes up, is she doing less because she knows I will do more? Or has she plateaued where it's like, oh, okay, well, Dad does this, so she's going to do the same? Or will she have learned from the last time because we talked through it so that she can do all of that thing without any help, or maybe needs just a little bit of help? So there's that, recognizing the patterns, but then also as your child matures, small fish going into a big pond again, as we all do in life. And so the next level of challenges, you might find yourself in the exact same situation where you have to provide more help again because your child maybe just has not yet developed that kind of that growth mentality, or that the ability to scale, that what the tools that worked at the level down here are the same tools that work up here. You just need more of it, and sometimes some new tools, of course. So I think those patterns and those perspectives can also be helpful in trying to discern, am I falling down the slope of becoming an enabler, or am I seeing real change and growth and ownership on my child's behalf?
Thanks, John. Well, we're pretty much at the end, so I just want to remind you of a couple of things I mentioned earlier. The Supports for Families series is available on our website. If you go to that TA Center Training tab, you can find that there. It's right there at the top. There's a manual and 5 modules, and it touches on a lot of things we talked about today and more. Again, Kirsten and Charlotte are both available for individual support, so please do reach out to them. I know I've already gotten a bunch of emails about certificates and copies of the slides and all that kind of stuff. I'll get to that as soon as possible. And I'm also going to be getting the recording up there on the website as soon as Zoom has it put together and it's ready to go. So with that, thanks, Kirsten and Charlotte. Appreciate everything today.
Thank you, Jeremy, for having us. It's always an honor and a privilege to hang out with you two and all of the families that show up for this. So thank you.
Absolutely. Our pleasure too. Thank you, John, for all your help keeping track of the Q&A and stuff. And thank you to everybody here in the audience. Appreciate you being here today, and we'll hope to see you again soon. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you.